Alright, so after the last recording I did for this, the next time I booted up Fire Emblem Engage, I remembered something that I meant to mention that I completely forgot about, so I'll mention it right now. It had to do with the exploration part after the mission in Chapter 17. There obviously went for a bit of a somber tone considering, what was going on in the chapter. But the one thing I didn't like about it is that they didn't have any music. It was just dead silence. And I don't know, they definitely could have put in some fitting music. I mean, this is the same series that had Don't Speak Her Name in Awakening, which is a amazing song, very somber tone. Speaking of the music in general, I did do Byleth's Paralogue, and it got me thinking, this is probably the thing that has been the most disappointing part of Engage for me. And I don't mean to, be ungrateful, I guess, because obviously a lot of talented people worked on the game in that and did a better job than I ever could. But I don't know, the soundtrack this time around just hasn't hit me. Every single Fire Emblem game to this point has had multiple just really great songs that sort of stuck with me, got in my head, and were just really good. That hasn't been the case this time, and even in general, I just don't feel like I've seen as much comments about the soundtrack this time around either. Maybe that's just me. And I think it might just have to do with the tone of the game being a bit different this time around, that it just may not be my taste for the direction they went with the soundtrack. But particularly hearing one of my favorite songs from Three Houses, Fodlan Winds, hearing that sort of remade in a bit of the Engage style sort of brought that critique a bit more to life. But enough of that. That map was pretty tough. I didn't really feel like I had an opportunity, because I like to try to keep my units as close as possible so I can build supports in that. But I don't really feel like I had that opportunity, because you're trying to defend these crystals. And I don't know, there's just a lot of pressure to just enemies constantly going after them, and that where it just wasn't possible without sacrificing some crystals, which I didn't want to do. I knew you'd probably get better rewards for the more crystals you save. It didn't help that you also had to have your team split up in the two different sides of the map. And at the end of the map, I did only lose one crystal. I was also finally, something I sort of neglected was Byleth's emblem skill, where it was Goddess Dance, where you can essentially dance for all surrounding units, giving them another turn. And with that, and I think a couple of the other units around Byleth had Warp, which is also another really, I don't remember particularly enemies using a lot in previous games, but it really affected this Paralogue and even some of the other missions I've done since last time. But yeah, that definitely kept me on my toes, and that's all there really was for that one. After that, Paralogue-wise, the other one I did was Sigurd's, which was also a little frustrating just because, the mission itself, there wasn't really any gimmicks or anything. It was a pretty normal map, but there was two units that were maxed out advanced class level 20 just in the corner of the map. I don't really know why. The recommended level was advanced class 6, I think. And then another thing that sort of bugged me, because I just don't like leaving that XP out there, but it just didn't seem feasible to be able to take them both on. But then, after you essentially have to take over a base to open a bridge, and then Sigurd starts charging you at that point, and simultaneously a bunch of reinforcements come. But Sigurd's the only one charging you, and it's not Sigurd's a pretty powerful unit, obviously. So I don't know, I just feel like I had to finish him off, and I just had to sort of let some of the units that were already on the island that he was on, and some of the new units that spawned in as reinforcements, I just had to let them go. Because I just felt like Sigurd probably would have killed a couple of units. I know I'm on casual, and I can kind of just let that happen and try to get the XP for the rest of my units, but I just didn't really want to do it that way. The two main story missions I did were Chapter 18, which was another. There always seems to be a mission where you're going between boats. I think every Fire Emblem game I've played, at least one, I should say. and it was fun. I think it was one of the better ones, actually, but they are normally not some of my favorite levels. But like I said, this one, maybe it's just sort of the mechanics and just how well the gameplay is this time around that sort of made it feel better. But yeah, there wasn't much to that. And then the next mission, though, the one I have gameplay of here, it was equally fun for most of it, but it also got pretty frustrating, particularly towards the end. I think it took me like a half hour to an hour to complete the last 2 turns and clear the bosses out in that. They brought back the miasma or whatever it's called, and I actually really like that gimmick. It really makes you think of where you have to place everyone, because it's just such an advantage or disadvantage to be caught in it. And there's so much of it, particularly on this map as well. And then you sort of have to go in and try to save one unit who can join your party, Sappher. We were introduced to her earlier in the story. I don't have much to say about her. We did get the previous mission, we got Lyndon, who was a character who exceeded my expectations. He and Alir had a pretty enjoyable support conversation. I like his whole experiments in that. And he actually has a lot of supports in general. Normally the later characters, they'll only have like a couple or maybe even just Alir. But yeah, another thing, and this is a spoiler alert, but something else I did spoil myself on was I know everyone you can recruit in the game, and I know at some point Mavier from the Four Hounds as well as Vale join you. I thought this may have been the mission Mavier did. I don't know, they might both come later, I guess. But that also sort of affected my strategy, because I thought, because you also had Marnie on the map, who was another of the Four Hounds. I don't know if I've ever really particularly named them. So I was trying to take out Marnie and not really bother with Mavier, thinking that maybe you had to take care of her first, and then maybe you can talk to Mavier and recruit him. And then I also thought, well, I can't really use Alir then, because Alir's normally the one that does the talking. So I think that made things a bit more difficult, a reason why those last couple turns took so long. And just in general, sometimes you start going wrong with the strategy that just really wasn't good, and you sort of realize, wait, this isn't working, but if I correct this thing that I did earlier that I wasn't even really thinking about, then it might work out okay, which it did. I'm surprised, though. It was pretty tough to keep everyone alive, especially once you start engaging the bosses. No pun intended. They bring in a bunch of reinforcements, of course, too. Once again, I'm really thankful for Rewind, because if this was like, I don't know, Awakening, I don't think Fate's had Rewind. I think it's only been in the last 2, and Echoes, too. But it would have been painful to have to replay that, especially with how long it finally took me to sort of get something going at the end. I mean, that may have been the point where I was just like, screw it, I'm on casual. What happens, happens. But luckily it didn't come down to that. And that's where I'm pretty much at. The one thing I will say that was pretty surprising is, like, I'm doing the levels sort of like with the Paralogues around the main story missions that are around the same recommended level. I think the next story chapter is recommended Advanced Class 10. But then out of all the Paralogues I have unlocked, I think only one is Advanced Class 10, and I think there's like 3 Advanced Class 8s and 1 7, so we might just be doing Paralogues for a bit, and with there being so many, especially around that range, I might wind up using my base team in 1 or 2 of them, which I was originally against, but at the same time, at this point, especially with how frustrating the last map got a little bit at the end, I'm a little more okay with it. I am normally, and I think at this point as well, at least like a couple levels behind the recommended level. So to at least maybe get even with it and go from there, especially like if that like the last map was pretty hard. And I assume it's going to get tougher, and there's going to be some other really tough maps coming up now that we're like another mild spoiler thing. I don't even know if you would consider it one, but I think there's 25 or 26 chapters in the game, and I'm on chapter 19, so I can imagine there's a couple really tough ones coming up, so it might be a good idea to get caught up with the recommended level. I don't know how much longer I can get away with not being there, at least without really taking advantage of like casual mode or something. Hopefully the recommended levels are pretty accurate. I would think they would be, because I think even the enemies are a level or two above the recommended level. But yeah, I don't want to end up like, I know one of my Awakening playthroughs, maybe I should create an extra save just in case, but I just remember just trying to balance, the Paralogues and the DLC with the main chapters, and then if you don't get that balance right, you'll make the game like way too easy. Which I know I'm playing on normal casual, but I still want a little bit of a challenge. That's why I started doing stuff like having these B teams to take on the Paralogues and that, because that's how I sort of wound up doing an Awakening that I thought was the best solution, and I've sort of done it ever since. But yeah, at this point, especially with so many in a row, and just where the recommended levels are at, like I feel like they almost, are trying to make you do a Paralogue, I guess. Because like I said, my levels are based on just pretty much using everyone on my A team on just about every main map. And we just so happen to be a little behind. But at least, we at least get fun Paralogue stories as opposed to having to, grind out random encounters and that, which, in my opinion, just aren't as entertaining. So yeah, I guess next time I will be getting you caught up on pretty much all Paralogues, probably.